Hello, hello, hello. Believe it or not, it's Wednesday again, and that means it's time for another installation of Did You Know, which is one of the digital ministries we have going on here at Fredsville Lutheran Church, located in rural Cedar Falls, Iowa. Member of the ELCA. I am Andy Graves. I'm the pastoral intern here at Fredsville, coming to you recorded from my office. This week, we're going to continue our exploration of some of the biblical misconceptions or things that people think they know, think they read, think they heard about the Bible, in the Bible, around the Bible, etc. We've done things like Ruth and Naomi, uh, Satan, Noah's Ark stories, Genesis stories, all the good ones. And today we're gonna get a little spicy, a little controversial, perhaps. You have been warned. If you don't like controversy in the church, this may not be the video for you. I invite you to pause and watch one of the other ones if you would so choose. Because this week there's this idea floating around in the church world and polite society, if you will, that there is a biblical norm for marriage. And that's where the spice gets. So now, if you weren't sure it's spicy, now you know it's spicy. Um, and so there's this idea that marriage has been ordained by God, that it's man and woman, and that's it. And you have 2.5 children and live happily ever after until the angels sweep us up into heaven, um, which is great. Like, I am married. I have been married since 2016. Um, January of 2016, we got married. We have a lovely son, and he's awesome. He's almost two. All of those great things, the benefits of marriage, the struggles of marriage, the ups, downs, twists, turns, living it. It's a journey. We're on it, and we're doing it. However, there is not a biblical roadmap for marriage, if you will. There are a lot of words about marriage. Jesus has words about marriage and divorce and things like that. Paul has words about marriage and divorce and what's better, being single or not, being celibate or married, or you name it, it's probably there. But then there's also stories in the Old Testament. So being Christians, we don't just have Jesus. It's a conglomerate faith tradition. It's the Judeo-Christian tradition because Jesus was a Jew. And so Jesus was operating with and from what we consider the Old Testament, um, which would actually be the Hebrew Bible. It's actually slightly different. Last week's video was about that. But in the Old Testament, there are a bunch of places where there are quote unquote models of marriage that don't fit the modern manifestation of what we think marriage should be. For instance, I will share my screen with you just so you have a kind of a visual. So this is kind of a Old Testament roadmap to marriage, if you will. And so we have biblical scriptures. You can look it up yourself. The stories are there. There are more than just this, but this is a nice little infographic for you. So at the top, we have man and woman. We have the nuclear family, um, like we have today, one man, one woman kind of thing. But then if you read a little bit, there's some caveats to that. So the wives are subordinate to their husbands. Interfaith marriages were forbidden. Marriage is generally arranged, not based on romantic love. Bride who could not prove her virginity was stoned to death. It was not a loving, committed relationship necessarily between a man and a woman. A lot of these, it was about property. The man typically paid a bridal fee to the woman's father, So she was bought. She was property of the man, not this, Hollywood romantic, like swooning and, dating and courting and all the traditional things we like to think about marriage. It was a business transaction. But then you move down, you have man plus wives and concubines. So Abraham had 2 concubines, Gideon had 1, Nahor had 1, Jacob had 1, Eliphaz had 1, Gideon um, had 2, Caleb had 2, Belshazzar had more than 1, Solomon had 300. So it's a collection of property. It's not necessarily a loving, committed relationship. It's a status symbol. Look how many people I have under my authority. And then you get into man and women. So you get polygamous relationships. There's examples of people who had multiple wives. Solomon had 700 wives. Rehoboam had 3. Esau had 3. Jacob had 2, etc., etc. And then you get into what happens, how marriages come about. So if a man is married to a woman, or and the man dies, then the widow has to then marry the man's brother. It's a levirate marriage, and then the firstborn is supposed to be the child of the deceased husband, and they didn't understand procreation back then, but it gets weird. Or you have the rapist and his victim. So if a virgin is raped, she doesn't have a choice. She has to marry the man who raped her. Or a soldier takes a prisoner of war. Male slave, female slaves can be forced to join in quote unquote holy matrimony. This is all biblical. These are all marriage arrangements in the Bible. So in essence, they are biblical marriages, which, taking a look at that, I'm not sure how many of us today would agree that most of these are the good and proper. It's not the loving, courtship that we think of in marriage. And then also there are instances, like I said, in the New Testament where there are words, and I can show you some of that too if you're so interested. We'll go back to this screen, and I've talked about cherry picking scripture before, and context matters, but you can look these up. They're all there, especially in 1 Corinthians. Paul has a lot to say. This blog site has kind of running through what we were talking about. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it's well for them to remain unmarried, so don't get married. It's not worth it. Virgins, he has opinions. Paul has opinions on what should happen. If marriage is going to get in the way of having a upstanding, righteous relationship with God, then don't do it. The unmarried man is anxious about the affairs of the Lord, how to please the Lord, but the married man is anxious about the affairs of the world, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. Unmarried woman and the virgin are anxious about the affairs of the Lord, so they may be holy in body and spirit, but the married woman is anxious about the affairs of the world, how to please her husband. So there are, you get a choice. You either get married or you don't. What's the problem? And then it goes on, biblical. Jesus has things to say. Don't get divorced, all of those things. And so there's no one clear teaching, if you will, about marriage. And if you go to Levirate marriage in the book of Leviticus, you'll find all kinds of other laws that may or may not be well presented in today's age. For instance, eating shellfish, wearing your polycotton blend shirts, trimming the hair at the side of your head, getting tattoos. That's a big no-no. There's all kinds of things. And so what is the point? What is the point of all this? For me and the teachings of the church that I belong to, we love people. We love people. If anybody's marriage is based on business transactions or being property, where's the love? We are called to love God and love our neighbor. And so I would hesitate to say that there is a biblical model of marriage, because throughout the Bible, there are all kinds of marriages and that were ordained by God, that were happening. And some of the characters that are highlighted there were main characters in the story of the Israelites. So, word of caution. We make snap judgments. We extrapolate to extremes in this day and age, and so maybe it's time to pump the brakes a little bit. Try to step it back just a little bit to see what's going on. Excuse me. Read around the passages, spirit of the law versus letter of the law, teaching take a step back and what was Jesus teaching as a whole, as opposed to taking individual pieces of teachings. Same with Paul, letter to the Corinthians, letter to the Romans. There's all kinds of Paul teachings, but context matters. And I would argue that love should be at the core of everything we do. So anyways, with that being said, this is a little longer than some of the others. Please take care of yourselves, take care of each other. For the sake of the world, do what you have to do to be safe. We're living in crazy times. There are experts everywhere. There are pseudo-experts just as many places. Just do what you need to do to be safe. Wear your face mask in public. Stay home if you're sick. Stay home if you're not sick. Stay home if you can. If you have to go to work, protect yourself for the sake of our neighbor. We love you. We care for you. Please let us know if there's anything we could do for you. Prayer, chats, whatever. Leave comments below, and I'll read those if I ever get notified that there is one. If not, so be it. Until next time, I'll see you on the other side. Be blessed.